Подожди.
Вокруг да около.
Значит, это мы, да, в Йосемити. Мы на 7-м сели. А оказывается, нам надо было 7-й полустанок.
А то вот этот вот такой рассеянный с улицы Йосемити. Он сел в оцепленный вагон и опять поспал немножко. И опять взглянул в окошко. А с платформы говорят, это город Ленинград. Он опять зашел и опять поспал немножко. И опять взглянул в окошко. Это что за полустанок? С платформы говорят, это город 7-й, number 7.
Ленинград.
Вам надо на 7-й опять.
Мы с 7-го приехали. Целый час ехали. Оказывается, вот этот Йосемити Valley Lodge, он находится 5 минут от нашей остановки. Ходьбы, не то что даже. Но мы едем сейчас на тур Йосемити Valley Tour, открытые, вот, и будем все видеть по кругу. Уже мы посетили, скажи, какой фолс?
Мы посетили Йосемити Falls.
Лоер.
С нашей палатки виден Upper Falls. Ну, а сегодня вот это, пока мы ждали, у нас было время, и мы с этого лодж пошли пешком на 20 минут туда и назад, и видели и middle, и видели lower.
И сфотографировались, конечно.
Так, сами из себя в красивых шляпах.
Fires. I've heard whispers it was just to prevent people from moving back home. Regardless, though, that severed some ties between Yosemite's 7 associated tribes and the National Park Service. But the building of Wahoga, the ceremonial roundhouse, and the educational center will hopefully rebuild some of the ties between those two organizations. On our other side here, we have Lighting Meadow. And that big surfboard-looking rock above it is Sentinel Rock. Sentinel Rock standing like a watchman over Lighting Meadow. Much like the U.S. Army stood as watchmen over Yosemite National Park in its early days, the first caretakers of Yosemite were not park rangers, no. Yosemite National Park was founded in 1890. The Park Service didn't exist until 1916, so it was over 25 years in which you had a park but no park rangers to protect it. And so the U.S. Army was tapped to fill that role, but not just anyone in the U.S. Army, 4 very specific regiments. The 24th and 25th Infantry and the 9th and 10th Cavalry. Those regiments were unique in the U.S. Army because they were the only regiments that had soldiers of color. They were made up entirely of soldiers of color, known as buffalo soldiers, because their curly black hair resembled the curly black fur of a buffalo's forehead. Myself and my colleagues to have a job today. We can certainly thank them for our spiffy uniform that echoes of our military past. We can also thank them for giving Camp 4 its name. There were about 20 or so of those camps Harding was set to take on El Capitan. Just 2 days after arriving to the park to lose the first ascent of Half Dome, Warren Harding began his first ascent of El Capitan. It took him 47 days and nights on the wall to do. 47 days and nights. Spread out over 16 months, he'd have to come down to replenish his food, to repair his climbing equipment, or replenish the jugs of wine, as the story goes, that he would take up with him. But yes, 47 days and nights on the wall. Now you have rope ladders, you have pitons, you have bolts, you have a whole bunch of specialized equipment that you can use to support your weight and aid in your upward progress. Contrast that with free climbing. When you're free climbing, you do still have a rope and harness attached to you to catch you if you fall. However, you can only use the natural features of the rock to support your weight, none of that other specialized equipment. And for decades after Warren Harding's first ascent, it was considered impossible to free climb El Capitan, but of course, this is Yosemite where the impossible is tradition. So in the early 1990s, there was a very well-decorated climber that had won almost every competition in the indoor scene. Was very well recognized. Everybody knew this climber's name, had won almost every medal. That climber retired from the indoor scene, was kind of tired of how monotonous it had become. It's, you only go a maximum of maybe 60 feet tall. You're kind of done in an afternoon. There's only so many ways you can arrange the plastic holes. That climber wanted to start taking on some bigger, more impressive projects. I'll tell you more about them in just a moment. First, we're coming up on Slaughterhouse Meadow here. Meadows have been used for all sorts of things through the years, including cattle grazing like this one. The cattle that were grazed here were raised for meat. They didn't want to transport the cattle too far to process them, so they just built the slaughterhouse here, hence the name Slaughterhouse Meadow. A bit of longer, darker grass kind of right there. That is
Cathedra.
known as Wasky Pond. It's filled with water in the springtime. Named for a very famous individual in the National Park Service, Mr. Wasky. Mr. Wasky invented the color brown that all of our Park Service buildings are painted. And I don't know about you all, but if I were to invent a color, I'd pick something a little more exciting than brown. And as the story goes, he was driving here on vacation, I'm sure enthralled by the beauty of the cathedral rocks and spires, and drove his car directly into the pond. He walked away from it just fine. His car stayed there for several months. So of course we had to memorialize the mistake and name the pond after him, Wasky Pond. Just seen fly into that oak tree that was in acorn woodpecker. They have these white patches on their wings and a bright red spot on the back of their head. Tend to be only about yay big or so. Anyway, yeah, okay. So now this climber retired from the indoor scene. Started taking on some bigger, more impressive outdoor projects, some multi-day big wall climbs. And in 1993, that climber came to Yosemite to test their grit on Yosemite granite, and in 1993, she became the first person to free climb El Capitan. It took her 4 days on the wall to do. And at the top, Lynn Hill didn't have a lot to say, but what she did say has stuck with us through the years. At the top, she was quoted as saying, "It goes, boy." So it has. There are now 200 or so different rock climbing routes to get up to the top of El Capitan. Thousands of climbers do it every single year. El Cap is the pinnacle of Yosemite climbing. Now, it's pretty hard to talk about Yosemite climbing without mentioning one name in particular, and that name is Alex Honnold. How many of you recognize that name? Quite many of you. All right. So Alex Honnold made a name for himself in the climbing community in the early 2000s by being the first person to free solo many routes in North America. When you're free soloing something similar to free climbing, you only have the natural features of the rock to support your weight. However, different from free climbing, when you are free soloing, you do not have a rope or harness attached to you to catch you if you fall. It is just you, your shoes, and chalk to dry your hands out. That's it. Accomplishment, and one that is definitely worth celebrating. And he would have done what he did if it weren't for footsteps of the ones that came before them. Early summer, kind of like May-ish, late April, May into June. Really coasting. Best time to climb is end of summer, early fall. October around here is usually nicknamed Rocktober because of how many people are climbing. It's dry, it's cold. Can't really complain. Hopefully we are gonna stop here in just a moment and have a chance to spot some climbers if there's anybody up there. Like I said, I don't think there will be though. But we are stopped. I assume the engine's going to be off and I can answer questions. You'll see a constellation of their headlamps as they set up camp for the night. And not just on El Capitan, but on the Cathedral Rocks, on Half Dome, on the wall next to Yosemite Falls. Climbers are on this rock like green on grass. They are everywhere. What exactly happened to give us this spectacular rock climbing? These perfectly vertical cliffs, sometimes even more than floating overhangs. The answer is geology. Now, how many of you are geologists or rock nerds like me? Great, I'm alone on this tramp. How many of you hate earth sciences? You're planning on checking out for the next 10 minutes. I appreciate your honesty. Well, if you want to check out for the next 10 minutes and take the next 10 minutes to arrange your talk for granted, I'm not going to give you a hard time, but let me make myself crystal clear. Geology rocks. It is the name of the game here in Yosemite, and if nothing else, enjoy the next 10 minutes of me nerding out. So, the way that this story starts is deep underneath Earth's surface, like 3 to 5 miles deep. All of this is molten magma, and it's cooling very, very, very slowly, like millions of years slowly. And when rock gets that much time to cool, like molecules can find like molecules, they will link up and bond together and form discrete chunks of identifiable crystal. You can pick up any 15,000 feet of stuff that had to have gone somewhere, and the answer is the Central Valley of California. There are a lot of farms down in the Central Valley. I don't know if any of you drove through there. Those farms are so successful because of how rich that soil is. All of it is volcanic sediment. This was the guts of ancient volcanoes, and as that all eroded away, went to the Central Valley, tons of nutrient-rich soil down there. How deep do we think the sediment in the Central Valley is? About 3 to 5 miles. Literally just cut and paste the sediment that was on top of the Sierra Nevada and put it down into the Central Valley. How do we know this? When we dig wells in the Central Valley, we pull up chunks of granite that are unique to the high country of Yosemite National Park. Rocks. So cool. That sediment was carried down here by ancient rivers, and as rivers carved through the rock, they will form narrow, V-shaped canyons. Yosemite is not quite yet. What happened was about 3 million years ago or so, so much snow fell that it compacted into ice, and the ice began to flow downhill. Follow the same path that those rivers did, and as that ice flowed, it carved the valley floor wider, carved the walls more sheer, more vertical, ended up with that flat-bottomed U-shape that we see today. Another example of which you can see up there at Bridalveil Canyon. Bridalveil Falls doing what she does best, flowing in that wind. You can see that fantastic U-shape that was left behind by a much smaller glacier that was up there. That glacier wasn't quite as heavy, didn't have the same erosional power as the main glacier coming through Yosemite Valley, so it didn't carve out quite as much granite. That's why that valley's a little bit further up off the valley floor. That geologic feature is known as a hanging valley. Bridalveil Falls is one of the only waterfalls in Yosemite that flows year-round. If anyone is interested in the hydrology as to why, I'm happy to talk about it. Find me at the next stop. I'm not going to subject everyone else on the trend to that.
When did they stop having fire falls?
I'll answer that question a little bit later. Short answer, 1960, 1970. That's pretty commonly accepted as truth, that glaciers formed Yosemite Valley, but that wasn't always the case. Back in the 1800s, Josiah Whitney had a different idea. I promise the man was good at his job. He was just wrong 2 spectacular times. So first, about Half Dome, and a second about the formation of the valley. His idea was that it did start as a narrow V-shaped canyon from a river, but then a catastrophic earthquake instead of a glacier caused the bottom to fall out and this shape we see today. It wasn't until this really weird Scotsman came along. He moved over to the States to glaciers. And Josiah Whitney said, well, if it was glaciers, where are they? Are they still actively shaping the park? And so our weird Scotsman went up into the high country. He found 2 active glaciers. Now I said that ice has to move to be considered a glacier. So to prove his theory, he took a white bark pine stake and stuck it in the ice. He came back 46 days later to find that his stake had moved 47 inches. About an inch a day is how fast that ice is moving. He was so excited, he took his findings back to Josiah Whitney. He said, look, there are 2 more glaciers. Here are the glacial features tied to them. I see all the same things in the valley. This had to have been glaciers. On those 2 glaciers, a little more high-tech this time. Instead of white bark pine stakes, PVC pipe, and GPS, he found that over the course of 46 days, his stakes had moved 47 inches. The exact same as their historic rate. He's going back up this year, exactly 150 years after that experiment, to continue the tradition of studying our glaciers, which is important because we don't know how much time we have left of them. We lose on average about 10% of our glacial volume every single year. One high water year like 2017. Watches, check your cell phones. Time to be back here in about 10-ish minutes. 10-ish minutes.
Is there a water source refill? Yeah. Over here. Okay.
If you need water, this yellow cooler that's right behind me here, you can grab.
Вот, there's Cathedral Rock.
Yes, so those kind of ones that look like knuckles coming up, those are the cathedral rocks, yes. And this one right here that has the diagonal line at the base of the shadow, that's known as Leaning Tower.
Leaning Tower. And what is Spire?
So the one that is kind of further in the distance, that is Sentinel Rock.
A Sentinel Rock. And then Half Dome.
And then Half Dome's in the back, yep. Yeah, that's one of the
It looks
things.
like it's a...
Ah, so there is bridal veil. Ah, it's interesting. Ah, bridal veil. But now it's closed.
А сейчас
Смотри, ушел вообще, его не
в ту
видно.
сторону. Вот сюда
Он
его
к нам пошел.
повело. Его.
Повело его, да. Это же брайдал.
Его туда, сюда,
То
наверх.
вверх, да.
Вообще, смотри, вон, видишь?
Совсем спрятался. Смотри. Смотри, аж вообще.
If you will stand it up there.
Это брайдал. А вот сейчас опустился. Смотри, опустился брайдал вейл. Вау. А вот уже опять расписался. Вау. Я.
Out here, I want to draw your attention to this floodwater level at 11 p.m. January 2nd, 1997. That is in fact how high the water was. Those of you with hats, your hats would be floating. That's how high the water was. That storm happened. It rolled in the early hours of New Year's Eve into New Year's Day.
Наводнение было.
1996 into 1997.
1997. 12.
How long, sorry?
How long did the water stay up before?
Oh, how long did the water stay that high before it dropped? I don't know. I know at least several days. It was the Pineapple Express. It was unseasonably warm. It started to rain here in the valley during the middle of everyone's New Year's celebrations. They didn't really seem to mind too much though. They just brought their parties inside. But what they didn't know is that it was also raining in the high country. Now typically when you have precipitation falling at 9,000 feet in January, it's snow and it stays up there. But that storm was so warm that even at 9,000, 10,000 feet, that storm was falling as rain. Now it's a common misconception that the rain melted the snow and that's what caused the river to swell so high. It's not quite true. We've done lots of hydrological studies to show that's not the case. It simply just formed a frozen crust over the top of the snow and frozen ground and immediately sloughed off all of that rain directly into the valley below. Over the course of a few hours, the flow of our river increased to be about 250 times what it is today. This is about 150 cubic feet per second. About 100 cubic feet per second. Think 100 basketballs floating by you every second. The flow of our river at the peak of that flood, 24,000 cubic feet per second. It destroyed roads. Took months for us to get our park back up and running. If any of you saw the flooding that happened in Yellowstone, eerily similar to what happened here in '97. Water is a very, very powerful force here in Yosemite. Whether it happens all at once in the case of that flood, or whether it happens slowly, bit by bit, bubbling up through the surface in the case of Fern Spring right here. That structure was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. That spring does flow. That's another waterfall that flows all year round. The narrow V-shaped canyons that brought all of the volcanic sediment out of the mountains into the Central Valley. It carried more than just volcanic sediment though. It carried something much more valuable. It carried gold. There are lots of gold deposits in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was discovered in the Central Valley in 1849, and practically overnight California was changed forever. Hundreds and then thousands of people rushed from around the country, around the world to seek their fortune mining gold. To rise. Tensions between the different mining camps, tensions between mining camps and the native tribes they encountered. Many times they were able to establish positive relations with the native tribes, because even if there was not money to be made in gold, there was money to be made in trade. Many times miners made it very difficult to maintain positive relations as they took more resources than the land could sustain. As they pushed people off of the land they lived on for thousands of years. Many times the native tribes fought back, frequently by raiding the mining camps and by their trading posts. Bridalveil Meadow, by the way. And California goldenrod is what's blooming right now. He put his foot down. He said, enough is enough. We need someone to take care of this Indian problem. So he begged the state of California to give him men, to give him arms. And they mounted the Mariposa Battalion. About 200 men whose sole purpose was to eradicate the native population of the area. Over the course of several campaigns, they would chase the war parties up over ridges, up over canyons, up over mountaintops, and on one such chase, they came up over a ridge, and the Mariposa Battalion were likely the first outsiders to see Yosemite Valley. That's how this place was discovered. Those rancherias and reservations were hired as guides, as laborers. They built some of the first roads, they tended some of the first gardens and hotels here. People will always find a way to come back home. I mentioned Yosemite's 7 associated tribes earlier. Today we have people from all 7 tribes living in the park, working for the land, taking care of this place as their ancestors had since time immemorial.
Мы были здесь, помните?
It'll take Kevin just a moment to get us into this tiny little parking lot. I'm never not impressed with the drivers that do this. They make it look so easy.
смотри, как он
We will
поворачивает.
have water and cups set out for you again next to our yellow cooler right here.
Вау.
I'll be hanging out by the bronze relief mat. Well, RV friend, we're pulling into a tram. If you guys want to hang out for just one moment while we park, if you could go back inside your car for just a moment.
It's actually
Bridal way.
Right over there. You see the black middle? You see the top of that black one? You can see a little little white.
I like that. I'm standing up there. But okay, no. I'll just get another one.
Okay, guys. Again, sorry.
еще туда смотри. Сейчас. Не туда. А вот смотри, я этот сфотографирую. Вот. Подожди, ничего не надо. Вот еще. Мы на этом приехали.
I hear them more often in Hetch Hetchy. They have a really pretty song that's a tumble of descending notes. Really little birds. They nest in canyon walls. Long beaks. Pretty. Oh, and then of course the big blackbirds that everybody sees around. Those are usually ravens, not crows. You can tell the difference. Crows tend to be smaller than ravens are. They also have a clearer call. So crows have a clear caw, whereas ravens sound like they have something stuck in their throat. So anyway, I've been practicing that one for a while. My roommates are tired of hearing it. It's a funny little bang on my walls. Be like, stop with the raven, I don't care. Looks like we're ready to go, Kevin. Although I'm sure you've already gathered that since we're in motion. I typically have a whiteboard out for people to write them down. Alas, I forgot it today. Some of the words that I hear most often: breathtaking, majestic, marvelous, awesome, awe-inspiring. There typically tends to be a theme associated with these words, and people have been coming here for at least 150 years, if not longer, and many of them have walked away with very, very similar words. Some of them, though, have walked away with different words. I'll share some of those with you. He didn't hit those cones. You believe that? Amazing. The miners that mounted the Mariposa Battalion, when they first saw Yosemite Valley, they were absolutely, completely, and totally underwhelmed. Crying to the white men coming in to take their land. This place was dangerous for them. One miner in his journals, I laughed out loud when I read this. He said, had I known that Yosemite was going to be famous, I would have looked at it. Could you imagine? Some of their stories garnered that attention. Stories of the 1,000-foot-tall waterfalls and sheer granite cliffs. People wanted to come see it for themselves. The first tourist party arrived in 1854. A of years is Awani. How did it come to be called Yosemite by us today? Also Bridal Veil Falls imageries. And for that, we can again thank the Mariposa Battalion. When they were on their way here, they heard this place and the people that lived here described as Yosemita, meaning some among them may be killers. Another account says maybe they misheard the word Usamani, meaning grizzly bear. So that's how we end up with Yosemite. It's a corruption of two words that outsiders use to describe this place. Yosemite. And it, like many of the other waterfalls in Yosemite, have stories of evil spirits attached to it. Wow, it's flowing upward right now. How cool is that? Evil spirits attached to it. The evil spirits of Pohono were not there, not to be found. She realized they were on top of that rock, so she enlisted the help of every animal she could find in the forest. They all took big running starts to try and leap up and get them. The raccoons, the mountain lions, the deer, the rabbits, the snakes, everyone. And no one could come close. But below, you don't just live there, you take care of it. You have obligations to that place. And one of the ways that the 7 tribes took care of this land was by setting intentional fires. They would do that for a multitude of reasons. Yellow living here right now, they are competing for too few nutrients. Used to be there. It used to be back by the 4 Mile Trail.